Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning the Saudi leadership of the dangers of reigniting ties with long-standing rival Iran following the China-brokered deal last month. In an interview on CNBC Wednesday, the premier also urged greater U.S. engagement in the Middle East. He said those who partner with Iran partner with misery, making reference to Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and Iraq. Netanyahu stressed that, quote, 95% of the problems in the Middle East emanate from Iran. The reestablishment of ties between long-term rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran has dealt a blow to Netanyahu's diplomatic crusade of pursuing Tehran's political isolation. It also prospectively set back Israel's attempts to normalize relations with Riyadh. And here in studio with me is Owen Alterman, I-24 News senior diplomatic correspondent. Owen, is Netanyahu's warnings falling on deaf ears?
Listen, obviously there's an element to this, Sarah, that could be seen as Israeli spin, and I don't say that necessarily in a critical way. It's the job of the Israeli Prime Minister to go into the foreign media and to push the country's interests and the country's narratives. On the other hand, there may be substance to it. Even in your, as you correctly put it in your lead, the deal prospectively hurts the prospects of normalization, right? We don't understand the full meaning of this deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I've been skeptical since the day it was signed that this is actually going to lead to a wonderful, beautiful friendship. And in fact, it might just be a tactic that the Saudis are using as a different way of managing their rivalry with Iran, right? Instead of simply fighting Iran and confronting Iran around the region, continuing to confront Iran around the region, but with embassies in each other's capitals, with channels of communication that are open, and with senior public visits. But that said, we have seen a lot of public progress in the relationship since then, right? The visits between Saudi Arabia and Syria, for example, of course, in a regime that's been aligned with Iran. The potential that the Saudi king will visit Tehran. We heard the Iranian president this week offer that invitation. Again, the embassies and consulates moving forward on being reopening. So there has been progress, but at the same time, it hasn't changed the fundamentals that these are two countries that seem to have different interests. And at any rate, it could be quite possible that Saudis could both do business with Iran and also do business with Israel. So I think it certainly makes sense for the Israeli government to be out there speaking about that narrative, and it has the added benefit of actually potentially being true.
So it's not completely off the table for now. But until then, how concerning is this new shift in geopolitics in the Middle East for Netanyahu?
Listen, obviously it's not Israel's first choice. Israel would much rather see a more hawkish posture toward Iran, obviously. And I think it does point to the fact that Israel and the Gulf states, for all of the talk about common cause on Iran, and for all of the talk about how that common cause on Iran was a driving force behind the Abraham Accords, that they are differently situated, right? Israel has no prospect of taking a softer stance in Iran because the anti-Israel ideology is too central to the Islamic Republic's ideology and to its geopolitics, right? Trying to get soft power in the Arab world by taking a hard line on Israel. There's no way for them to compromise, and so there's no way for Israel to compromise, as opposed to the Gulf states where there is potential for more nuance, and that's what we're seeing with the Saudi-Iranian deal. It's not Israel's first choice, but I don't even necessarily think it's an issue of making lemons out of lemonade. The reality is the imperatives, the many imperatives that could potentially drive Saudi Arabia and Israel to want to normalize are still there. If anything, the bigger building block would seem to be not the deal with Iran, but policies by the Israeli government and statements by Israeli government ministers that are making it more difficult for the Saudis to take a more public stance on their relationship towards Israel.
The Saudis have reiterated a two-state solution is the only way for them to have any sort of peace deal with Israel.
Right. Again, there may be ways of finessing that. And of course, the other obstacle that the negotiations between Riyadh and the Biden administration seem to have reached something of a dead end, at least for now. And were the Saudis to get some kind of compensation, if you will, or incentives from the Biden administration deliverables, then maybe they would be able to move forward. That's been our reporting in the past and the reporting of others. So there are other barriers to normalization. I'm not sure that the deal with Iran is the central one, or even one at all.